The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned interstate as Jake Morrison pressed his eye to the rifle scope, watching the horde of infected shuffle through the skeletal remains of what used to be downtown Atlanta. 3 years had passed since the first outbreak, but the war between the living and the undead had only intensified, evolving from desperate survival into organized warfare. The zombies had changed too, no longer the mindless wanderers of the early days, but something far more terrifying. They moved with purpose now, coordinating their attacks like a grotesque army with an intelligence that chilled survivors to the bone. "Movement at 2 o'clock, whispered Emily Rodriguez from her position behind the concrete barrier, her medical bag clutched tightly against her chest. The former emergency room doctor had seen horrors that would break most people, but she'd learned to channel her fear into focus, treating wounded survivors while the world crumbled around them. Her dark eyes tracked the massive crowd of infected below, easily 3,000 strong, all moving in the same direction with an eerie synchronization that defied everything they thought they knew about the undead. Marcus Thompson adjusted his makeshift communication device, the electronic engineer's hand steady despite the tremor of exhaustion that ran through his body. For weeks, he'd been intercepting strange radio signals from the infected zones, patterns that suggested something was organizing the zombie masses, directing their movements with military precision. "Jake, you need to see this," he called softly, holding up a tablet displaying heat signatures from his jury-rigged thermal scanner. "They're not just wandering anymore. Look at the formation, they're flanking the refugee camp at Stone Mountain." The realization hit the small group like a physical blow. Somewhere in the chaos of the apocalypse, the zombies had developed tactical awareness, and now 40,000 survivors at the last major safe zone were walking into a trap. Jake lowered his rifle, his weathered face grim with the weight of command he'd never asked for but couldn't abandon. The former police officer had lost everything in the first wave, his wife, his daughter, his faith in humanity's ability to survive, but he'd found purpose in protecting the strangers who looked to him for leadership when the government fell and the military scattered. "We have to warn them," Rebecca Williams said, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had helped her survive when her family hadn't. Becca had been a high school history teacher before the world ended, but 3 years of scavenging and fighting had transformed her into someone who could read danger in the wind and find hope in the darkest moments. She studied the zombie formation through her binoculars, noting how they moved in waves, leaving gaps that looked accidental but felt purposeful. "This isn't random. Something's commanding them." Tyler Jackson, barely 21 and still carrying his college textbooks in his worn backpack, felt his stomach churn as he processed what they were witnessing. The engineering student had joined their group 6 months ago, half dead from hunger and exhaustion, but his youth and technical knowledge had proven invaluable in their ongoing fight for survival. "My dad always said the smart predators hunt in packs," he muttered, remembering hunting trips that seemed like they'd happened in another lifetime. "But this is different. This is strategy." David Connor, the grizzled mechanic who'd become their group's practical philosopher, spat into the dust and shook his head. At 55, Dave had lived through enough to know when humanity was staring into the abyss, and this felt like the moment everything would be decided. "Been saying it for months, these things are learning, adapting. Question is, what's teaching them?" His calloused hands gripped his shotgun tighter as he watched the infected masses coordinate their movement with the precision of a well-drilled army. The wind carried the distant sound of screams from Stone Mountain, confirming their worst fears. The zombie army had begun their assault, and 40,000 people were trapped with nowhere to run. Jake felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions pressing down on him as he looked at his companions, this small family forged in fire and loss, each one willing to die for the others, each one looking to him for answers he didn't have. "We can't save them all," Emily said quietly, her medical training making her brutally honest about their limitations. 6 people against thousands of infected? It's suicide. But even as she spoke the logical words, her hands were already checking her medical supplies, preparing for the wounded they'd inevitably encounter if they attempted a rescue mission that had no chance of success. Marcus's tablet chimed softly, displaying new thermal readings that made everyone's blood run cold. The zombie army wasn't just attacking Stone Mountain, it was part of a coordinated assault happening simultaneously across multiple survivor settlements throughout the southeast. Whatever intelligence was directing the undead had patience, planning, and resources that suggested humanity's extinction wasn't just possible anymore, it was systematic, methodical, and perhaps inevitable. "Then we make ourselves count," Jake said finally, shouldering his rifle and looking toward the smoke rising from Stone Mountain. In the distance, explosions bloomed like deadly flowers, marking humanity's desperate last stand against an enemy that had evolved beyond their worst nightmares, and the 6 survivors knew their war was just beginning. The abandoned gas station on Highway 285 became their temporary command post as the group huddled around Marcus's makeshift communication array, listening to the desperate radio chatter from Stone Mountain's defenders. Static-filled voices painted a picture of coordinated zombie assaults that defied everything survivors had learned about the infected. They were using tools now, crude weapons fashioned from debris, and worse still, they seemed to understand the concept of sacrifice, sending waves of their own kind into gunfire to wear down human ammunition supplies before launching their primary attacks. "This changes everything," Rebecca said, her teacher's mind already analyzing patterns that others might miss. She'd been mapping zombie movements for months, trying to understand their behavior, but this level of tactical sophistication suggested something far more terrifying than simple evolution. "They're not just learning to hunt better, they're learning to wage war." Her fingers traced paths on a worn road atlas, showing how the simultaneous attacks had cut off escape routes between safe zones, isolating each settlement to prevent mutual aid. Tyler's laptop, jury-rigged to Marcus's antenna system, displayed surveillance footage he'd hacked from traffic cameras still functioning on emergency power. The images showed zombie formations that resembled military maneuvers, pincer movements, feints, even what appeared to be reconnaissance units scouting human defenses before the main assault. "Look at this," he whispered, pointing to a thermal image that made everyone's blood freeze. "They're leaving their weakest behind to die while the stronger ones advance. That's not instinct, that's command structure." David's weathered hands trembled slightly as he loaded shells into his shotgun, the old mechanic's practical mind racing through implications that kept getting worse. "Spent 40 years fixing engines, and every machine that works has something controlling it," he said quietly. "Question ain't whether they got a leader anymore, question is what kind of leader can think like this." His eyes met Jake's across the cramped space, both men understanding that they were facing an enemy that might be as intelligent as they were, but with none of humanity's limitations. Emily monitored radio frequencies from Stone Mountain's medical teams, her doctor's training helping her interpret the coded updates about casualty rates and supply shortages. What she heard made her stomach clench with professional dread. The infected weren't just killing anymore, they were capturing humans alive, dragging them away for purposes that no one wanted to contemplate. "Jake, we need to move now if we're going to help anyone," she urged, checking her medical supplies one final time. "The infection rate in the camp is spiking, but it's not from bites, it's something else." Marcus's equipment suddenly erupted with a signal unlike anything they'd encountered before, a low-frequency transmission that seemed to pulse with deliberate rhythm, almost like a heartbeat broadcast across the airwaves. "That's coming from the center of the zombie formation," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Whatever's controlling them, it's talking to them right now." The engineer's face went pale as he realized the implications. If the zombies were receiving real-time commands, then their enemy wasn't just intelligent, it was actively directing every move in this apocalyptic chess game. Jake studied the tactical situation through his rifle scope, watching zombie formations shift and adapt in response to human defensive positions with the precision of a seasoned military commander. The infected masses moved like a single organism, responding to threats and exploiting weaknesses with an efficiency that spoke of central coordination and strategic planning. "We can't fight this like we've been fighting," he admitted, the weight of leadership heavy in his voice. "Everything we know about zombie behavior just became obsolete." The radio crackled with a transmission that made everyone freeze, a human voice, but speaking in measured tones that seemed wrong somehow, describing Stone Mountain's defensive positions with clinical accuracy. "Sector 7's ammunition depleted. Recommend flanking maneuver through residential area. Human morale breaking on eastern perimeter. The voice cut off abruptly, leaving the group staring at each other in horrified silence as the implications sank in. That was a collaborator, Rebecca breathed, her face white with shock and disgust. Someone inside Stone Mountain is feeding information to whatever's controlling the zombies. The revelation hit the group like a physical blow. Not only were they facing an evolved enemy, but humanity itself was compromised, with traitors willing to sell out their own species for unknown reasons. Tyler's hands shook as he traced the radio signal's origin point on his equipment, the young man's engineering background helping him triangulate the transmission source. "It's coming from inside the medical center," he reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone in Stone Mountain's command structure is working with them." The betrayal felt like a knife twist, destroying the last illusions about human unity in the face of extinction. David chambered around and looked toward the smoke-filled horizon where Stone Mountain burned, his gruff voice carrying decades of hard-earned wisdom. "Then we stop playing defense and start hunting the real enemy," he growled, knowing that their small group had just become humanity's last hope against an intelligence that understood them better than they understood themselves. The decision to infiltrate Stone Mountain came with the grim understanding that they were likely walking into a trap, but Jake's group moved through the abandoned suburbs with the practiced silence of survivors who'd learned that noise meant death in the new world. The closer they got to the besieged settlement, the more evidence they found of the zombies' terrifying evolution. Makeshift barricades constructed from overturned vehicles formed defensive positions around the camp's perimeter, forcing human defenders into killing zones where infected masses could overwhelm them through sheer coordination rather than mindless rushing. Emily treated this like a medical puzzle, analyzing the zombie formations through her binoculars and noting how they positioned their most damaged members as shields while fresher infected flanked around obstacles with tactical precision that spoke of military training or something far worse. "They're using our own tactics against us," Marcus observed, his equipment detecting multiple radio frequencies that seemed to coordinate zombie movements in real time, creating a communication network that rivaled anything the scattered human settlements had managed to establish. The engineer's face was grim as he tracked signal patterns that suggested the infected forces were receiving updated intelligence about human positions, ammunition levels, and defensive weak points with an accuracy that could only come from inside knowledge. Tyler helped him analyze the data streams, the young man's technical background revealing how the zombie coordination system operated like a hive mind with individual units receiving specific instructions based on battlefield conditions and strategic objectives. Rebecca's historical perspective provided crucial insight as she compared the zombie assault patterns to famous military campaigns from her teaching days, recognizing elements of blitzkrieg tactics, siege warfare, and psychological operations that suggested their enemy had studied human conflict extensively. "This isn't just evolution," she whispered as they observed infected units feigning retreat to draw defenders out of protected positions before turning and striking with coordinated precision. "Someone or something has been teaching them, studying our military history and adapting our own strategies to use against us." The implications were staggering. If their enemy understood human warfare better than humans did, then every defensive strategy ever developed was potentially compromised. David's mechanical expertise proved invaluable as he identified subtle modifications the zombies had made to vehicles and equipment around Stone Mountain's perimeter, crude but effective alterations that turned civilian cars into mobile battering rams and construction equipment into siege weapons that could breach the settlement's concrete barriers. "These modifications ain't random," he growled, pointing out welding marks and structural reinforcements that required knowledge of engineering principles and access to industrial tools. "Whatever's running this show knows how to build, not just destroy." The old mechanic's observations painted a picture of an enemy that wasn't just tactically sophisticated but technologically adaptive, capable of turning humanity's own infrastructure against them. Jake felt the weight of command pressing down harder as he realized their small group was potentially humanity's only chance to understand and counter this new threat, but the radio chatter from Stone Mountain's defenders grew increasingly desperate as ammunition ran low and zombie forces pressed their advantages with relentless efficiency. Through his rifle scope, he could see human defenders falling back from position after position, not because they lacked courage but because they were facing an enemy that anticipated their every move and countered their tactics with supernatural precision. The infected masses moved like water, flowing around strong points and concentrating force against weak areas with the kind of battlefield awareness that took human commanders years to develop. Emily's medical bag felt heavier with each step as she considered the implications of what they'd learned about infection rates inside Stone Mountain. If the zombies weren't just biting victims but had developed other methods of spreading their condition, then traditional quarantine procedures would be useless and the last major human settlement might already be compromised from within. "We need to assume everyone inside could be infected or turned," she told the group, her clinical detachment masking the horror of treating fellow humans as potential enemies. "Whatever's controlling the zombies has had 3 years to perfect their methods, and we're seeing the results." The sound of systematic explosions from Stone Mountain's direction confirmed their worst fears. The zombie forces were using coordinated demolition tactics to bring down defensive structures, working methodically to eliminate human advantages rather than simply overwhelming them through numbers. Marcus's equipment detected timed radio signals preceding each explosion, proving that the attacks were centrally coordinated and precisely executed with military timing that suggested professional knowledge of siege warfare and urban combat tactics. Tyler's youth made him the group's most optimistic member, but even he struggled to maintain hope as they witnessed the systematic dismantling of humanity's last major stronghold by an enemy that seemed to understand them better than they understood themselves. "Maybe the collaborator is the key," he suggested, trying to find some angle they could exploit in what appeared to be an impossible situation. "If we can identify them, we might learn how the control system works." His engineering mind focused on the technical aspects of the zombie coordination network, looking for vulnerabilities in what appeared to be a flawlessly executed plan for human extinction. As they approached Stone Mountain's outer defenses, the group realized they weren't just trying to save 40,000 survivors, they were attempting to understand and defeat an intelligence that had turned humanity's greatest survival instinct, their ability to work together, into their greatest weakness through infiltration, coordination, and strategic thinking that surpassed anything human military leaders had achieved. And time was running out for both the settlement and possibly the entire human race. The breach in Stone Mountain's perimeter fence came easier than expected, which immediately set off every survival instinct Jake's group had developed over 3 years of fighting the undead. Experienced survivors knew that when something seemed too easy, it usually meant walking into a carefully prepared trap. Emily slipped through first, her medical training making her naturally cautious about unknown situations, and what she found on the other side made her blood run cold with professional recognition. The infected hadn't broken through the fence, they'd been methodically cutting it with tools, creating precise entry points that funneled human defenders into predetermined killing zones while leaving escape routes for their own forces. The surgical precision of the breach points revealed an understanding of crowd dynamics and defensive psychology that spoke of extensive planning and intimate knowledge of human behavior under stress. Marcus's communication equipment immediately detected a sophisticated jamming field that was selectively blocking certain radio frequencies while allowing others to pass through, creating a communication blackout that prevented Stone Mountain's defenders from coordinating effectively while zombie forces maintained their own network connectivity. "They're not just jamming everything," he whispered urgently, adjusting his equipment to find clear channels. "It's targeted interference. They know exactly which frequencies we use and they're shutting us down while keeping their own systems operational." The technical sophistication required for selective jamming suggested access to military-grade equipment and expertise that went far beyond anything the scattered survivor groups possessed. Tyler's laptop revealed thermal imaging that showed the true horror of Stone Mountain's situation. The zombie forces had infiltrated the settlement in small groups over several days, positioning themselves strategically throughout the camp before launching their coordinated assault, meaning the battle wasn't a siege but an internal uprising supported by external forces. "Look at these heat signatures," he said, his young voice tight with fear as he pointed to dispersed zombie positions inside the supposed safe zone. "They're not breaking in, they were already here, waiting for orders." The realization that the settlement had been compromised for days or possibly weeks meant that every defensive plan and evacuation route was known to their enemies. Rebecca's historical perspective helped her recognize the tactical pattern as they moved deeper into the settlement. The the zombies were using classic infiltration and subversion techniques perfected by intelligence agencies during the Cold War, turning the humans' own defensive positions against them by attacking from unexpected directions and creating confusion that prevented effective resistance. "This is psychological warfare," she observed, noting how the infected forces had targeted the settlement's command post, medical facilities, and communication centers first, destroying human morale and coordination before attempting to eliminate the defenders themselves. The systematic approach to breaking human resistance showed an understanding of military doctrine that suggested their enemy had studied warfare extensively. David's mechanical eye caught details that others missed as they navigated through the settlement's chaos. Zombie forces were using captured human equipment with modifications that improved effectiveness for their specific physiology, suggesting not just intelligence but engineering capability and access to manufacturing resources that implied a much larger operation than anyone had imagined. "They've got workshops somewhere," he growled, examining a zombie-modified rifle that had been adapted for use by hands with limited dexterity but enhanced strength. "This ain't field modifications, this is mass production." The implications were staggering if their enemy had industrial capacity and was equipping zombie forces with purpose-built weapons and equipment. Jake led the group toward Stone Mountain's medical center where Tyler had traced the collaborators' radio transmissions, but the route took them through scenes of devastation that revealed the true sophistication of their enemy's psychological warfare campaign. Human bodies had been arranged in specific patterns that created maximum terror impact, while zombie graffiti painted on walls showed symbols and messages that suggested cultural knowledge and propaganda techniques designed to break human morale. The infected forces weren't just killing indiscriminately but were sending specific messages about human weakness and the futility of resistance that spoke of a coordinated information warfare campaign. Emily's medical training became crucial as they encountered wounded survivors who described symptoms that didn't match traditional zombie infections. Victims reported experiencing vivid hallucinations, hearing voices that gave specific instructions, and losing control of their actions without the physical transformation associated with zombie bites. "This isn't the same infection we've been fighting," she warned the group, her clinical analysis revealing that their enemy had developed new methods of control that bypassed the traditional infection process entirely. "They're using some kind of neurological agent that affects brain function without requiring physical transformation." The medical implications suggested biological warfare capabilities that put every human at risk regardless of traditional protective measures. Marcus detected a sudden spike in radioactivity as zombie forces began coordinating a massive assault on the medical center, apparently triggered by their group's approach to the facility where the collaborator was hidden, confirming that their movements were being monitored and reported in real time by human agents working with the infected forces. "We're expected," he reported grimly, watching as his equipment showed zombie units moving to surround their position with military precision. "Someone's been tracking us since we entered the settlement." The revelation that they'd been walking into a trap from the moment they breached the perimeter meant their mission to expose the collaborator had become a fight for survival against an enemy that knew their every move. Tyler's thermal imaging revealed the chilling truth as they approached the medical center. The building was surrounded by zombie forces that included humans who showed no signs of infection but were working alongside the undead with apparent free will, suggesting that collaboration wasn't the result of coercion or infection but voluntary betrayal of their own species for unknown reasons. The young engineer's voice shook as he reported what his equipment detected inside the building: dozens of humans working with infected forces in what appeared to be a joint command structure that challenged everything they thought they knew about the war between the living and the dead. The medical center's automatic doors had been disabled, forcing Jake's group to enter through a shattered window where the glass crunched underfoot with sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the eerie silence that had fallen over this section of Stone Mountain settlement. Inside, the facility's fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows that made it impossible to distinguish between furniture and potential threats, but Emily's medical background helped her navigate the familiar layout even as her stomach churned at the sight of equipment that had been deliberately sabotaged to prevent treatment of wounded defenders. The systematic destruction of medical supplies and life support equipment revealed a level of calculated cruelty that went beyond simple military objectives. Someone had wanted the wounded to suffer, to die slowly in view of other survivors as a psychological weapon designed to break human morale and encourage surrender. Marcus's communication equipment detected multiple active radio transmissions originating from the building's upper floors, but the signals were encrypted using protocols that seemed to blend human military codes with something else entirely, patterns that suggested their enemy had developed hybrid communication systems that allowed seamless coordination between human collaborators and infected forces. "The signal strength is strongest on the third floor," he reported quietly, adjusting his equipment to avoid detection while tracking the source of commands that were directing zombie movements throughout the settlement in real time. Tyler assisted with the technical analysis, his young mind racing to understand how human technology had been adapted to interface with whatever intelligence was controlling the infected masses, creating a communication network that bridged the gap between human reasoning and zombie coordination. Rebecca's historical knowledge proved invaluable as they climbed the emergency stairwell, her understanding of collaboration during wartime helping her recognize psychological profiles of humans who might willingly work with an enemy against their own species: desperation, ideological conversion, coercion through threats to loved ones, or simply the belief that humanity was doomed and collaboration offered the only path to survival. During World War II, collaborators often convinced themselves they were saving lives by working with occupying forces, she whispered, her teacher's mind analyzing motivations that could drive someone to betray 40,000 survivors to an enemy that viewed humans as either food or slaves. The parallel wasn't perfect, but it helped explain how rational people might justify the ultimate betrayal of their own species. David's practical experience with human nature made him the most pessimistic about what they'd find, the old mechanic having seen enough of humanity's capacity for selfishness and betrayal to know that some people would sell out their neighbors for personal advantage even during an apocalypse. Money, power, survival, same motivations that always drive folks to do evil, he growled, checking his shotgun as they approached the third floor where the radio signals originated. Question is whether this collaborator thinks they're gonna survive what's coming, or if they just want to take everyone else down with them. His weathered hands remained steady despite the tremor of rage that ran through him at the thought of someone deliberately sabotaging humanity's last major stronghold. Emily felt her medical oath weighing heavily as they prepared to confront someone who had violated every principle of healing by turning medical facilities into weapons against the wounded and defenseless, but her clinical training also made her curious about the psychological mechanisms that could drive a healthcare worker to such extreme betrayal. The deliberate sabotage of medical equipment suggested someone with intimate knowledge of how to maximize suffering while minimizing the chances of survival, indicating that their collaborator might be a medical professional who had turned their healing knowledge into a tool for systematic murder. Whoever did this knew exactly which equipment to target for maximum psychological impact, she observed, noting how life support machines had been damaged in ways that would cause slow, obvious failures rather than immediate shutdowns. Jake's law enforcement background helped him recognize the crime scene elements as they moved through corridors lined with evidence of systematic betrayal. Human defenders had been led into ambush positions through false radio communications, medical supplies had been poisoned or contaminated to spread infection among the wounded, and security codes had been compromised to allow zombie infiltration of supposedly secure areas. The scope of the collaboration suggested someone with high-level access to Stone Mountain's defensive systems and the trust of the settlement's leadership, making the betrayal even more devastating for morale and future human cooperation. This wasn't just giving information to the enemy, he realized grimly. This was active sabotage designed to maximize casualties and minimize resistance. Marcus's equipment suddenly detected a familiar voice broadcasting from the floor above, Dr. Amanda Thornton, Stone Mountain's chief medical officer and the person responsible for coordinating healthcare for all 40,000 survivors, her calm professional tone describing human defensive positions and medical supply levels with the clinical detachment she'd once used to discuss patient conditions. Recommend targeting the pediatric ward next, her voice said over the radio with chilling matter-of-factness. Children's screams will break parental resistance more effectively than direct assault on defensive positions. The words hit Emily like a physical blow as she recognized a colleague whose reputation for saving lives had made her a hero among the survivors. Tyler's thermal imaging revealed the horrifying scene awaiting them on the third floor. Dr. Thornton sat at a communications console surrounded by a mixture of infected and apparently healthy humans, all working together with the coordinated efficiency of a military command center. monitoring human movements throughout the settlement and directing zombie forces with the precision of professional strategists. "She's not being coerced," the young man whispered in shock as his equipment showed vital signs that indicated calm focus rather than fear or stress. "She's doing this voluntarily." The revelation that one of humanity's most trusted healers had become the architect of their destruction represented a betrayal so fundamental that it challenged every assumption about human nature and loyalty during the apocalypse. The group realized they weren't just facing a single collaborator but an entire command structure that had been operating within Stone Mountain for months, coordinating the systematic destruction of humanity's last major stronghold through a combination of medical sabotage, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare that had turned the settlement's greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. And now they had to decide whether to attempt capture or elimination of traitors whose knowledge might be humanity's only hope of understanding and defeating an enemy that had corrupted their own species from within. The confrontation with Dr. Thornton unfolded with a surreal quality that made reality seem negotiable, as Jake's group positioned themselves outside the command center while listening to the woman who had saved hundreds of lives calmly discussing the most effective methods for breaking human resistance through targeted psychological trauma. Emily felt her world tilt as she recognized the voice of someone she'd admired professionally, a physician whose dedication to healing had made her a legend among survivors, now coordinating attacks designed to maximize suffering among the very people she'd sworn to protect. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound because it violated fundamental assumptions about human decency and medical ethics that had anchored Emily's sense of purpose throughout the apocalypse. Marcus detected additional radio traffic that revealed the true scope of the collaboration network. Dr. Thornton wasn't operating alone but was part of a coordinated effort that included medical professionals, military personnel, and civilian leaders from multiple survivor settlements across the southeast, all working together to facilitate zombie operations against their own communities. "There are at least 12 other settlements with active collaborator networks," he whispered urgently, his equipment tracking encrypted communications that painted a picture of systematic betrayal spanning hundreds of miles and involving thousands of human agents working with infected forces. Tyler helped analyze the data streams, his technical background revealing communication protocols that suggested the collaboration had been planned and coordinated for months, possibly since the early days of the outbreak. Rebecca's historical perspective provided crucial context as she listened to the radio chatter, recognizing ideological patterns that reminded her of religious conversion movements and political radicalization campaigns that had shaped human history during times of crisis and social breakdown. "They're not just collaborating," she realized with growing horror. "They've been converted. Listen to how they talk about humans, like we're a disease that needs to be cured." The language pattern suggested that the collaborators genuinely believed they were serving a higher purpose by facilitating human extinction, viewing their betrayal as a form of salvation rather than treachery. The psychological transformation required for such fundamental conversion indicated sophisticated indoctrination techniques that went far beyond simple coercion or survival instinct. David's practical wisdom helped him understand the mechanical aspects of what they were witnessing as he observed the command center through a cracked door, noting how human technology had been seamlessly integrated with biological systems that pulsed with organic life, creating hybrid interfaces that allowed direct communication between human operators and infected masses. "That ain't just radio equipment," he growled quietly, pointing to tendrils of organic material that grew from the communication consoles like technological cancer, connecting human operators to something that looked more biological than mechanical. "They're plugged into whatever's controlling the zombies, physically connected to it." The implications were staggering if the collaboration required actual biological integration between human conspirators and the intelligence directing the zombie forces. Jake felt his law enforcement instinct screaming danger as he processed the tactical situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that included both infected masses and human traitors with intimate knowledge of survivor psychology and defensive capabilities. But the intelligence they could gather from this command center might represent humanity's only chance to understand and counter the coordination network that was systematically destroying human settlements. Through his rifle scope, he could see Dr. Thornton and her team working with the focused intensity of medical professionals during a crisis, except their patient was human civilization and their treatment plan was extinction. "We need to take at least one of them alive," he decided grimly, knowing that interrogation might provide crucial information about the collaboration network structure and objectives. Emily's medical training became both an asset and a liability as she recognized several of Dr. Thornton's assistants, healthcare workers she'd trained with, people whose dedication to saving lives had been legendary among the medical community, now coordinating systematic murder with the clinical detachment they'd once used to discuss treatment protocols. Dr. Patricia Hayes, nurse supervisor Linda Crawford, surgeon Michael Chung, she whispered, identifying colleagues whose betrayal felt like watching her entire profession commit suicide. These aren't desperate people making survival choices, these are medical professionals who've completely abandoned their oath to do no harm. The personal dimension of the betrayal made it harder for Emily to maintain clinical objectivity as she prepared to potentially kill people she'd once respected and trusted. Marcus's equipment detected a sudden change in the communication patterns as Dr. Thornton apparently became aware of their presence, her calm voice shifting to alert tones as she coordinated defensive measures that included both zombie forces and human security teams equipped with advanced weapons and tactical gear. "They know we're here," he reported urgently, watching as his monitors showed encrypted messages spreading throughout the collaboration network, alerting other command centers to the presence of hostile survivors and requesting immediate support from infected forces positioned throughout the settlement. Tyler's thermal imaging revealed armed humans moving to surround their position with military precision that suggested professional training and extensive preparation for exactly this kind of infiltration attempt. The radio crackled with Dr. Thornton's voice, but now she was speaking directly to Jake's group rather than coordinating operations, her tone carrying the patient condescension of a physician explaining terminal diagnosis to family members who refused to accept medical reality. "Officer Morrison, Dr. Rodriguez, I know you're listening," she said with the calm authority that had once commanded respect in medical conferences and emergency situations. "You're fighting for a species that's already extinct, we're simply facilitating the transition to something better, something that doesn't destroy everything it touches." Her words carried the conviction of someone who genuinely believed she was serving a noble cause, making her transformation from healer to destroyer even more chilling because it wasn't motivated by evil but by twisted compassion for what she viewed as a suffering world that needed to be put out of its misery. The group realized they weren't just facing military opposition but ideological warfare designed to convert rather than simply defeat human resistance, and as zombie forces began surrounding the medical center while human collaborators attempted to justify genocide as mercy, Jake's team prepared for a battle that would determine not just their survival but their understanding of what humanity was worth fighting for in a world where some humans had chosen extinction over evolution. The escape from Dr. Thornton's command center required split-second decisions that would haunt Jake's conscience for whatever time remained in his life, as the group fought their way through corridors filled with people who had once been humanity's protectors but now served as willing executioners for their own species. Emily found herself unable to pull the trigger when faced with Nurse Crawford, a woman who had taught her emergency procedures during medical school, but hesitation cost precious seconds as the corrupted healthcare worker lunged forward with surgical instruments modified into weapons, forcing Rebecca to make the kill shot that saved Emily's life while destroying another piece of her faith in human redemption. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the physical combat because every enemy face belonged to someone who had once dedicated their life to helping others, making each necessary death feel like murdering the memory of what humanity used to represent. Marcus's communication equipment became their lifeline as he coordinated their fighting retreat, but the radio chatter revealed the true scale of humanity's betrayal. Collaboration networks were activating in settlements across 3 states, with trusted leaders, medical professionals, and military personnel simultaneously turning on their own communities in a coordinated uprising that had been planned for months. "It's happening everywhere," he reported between bursts of gunfire, his equipment tracking emergency transmissions from dozens of human settlements as they fell to internal sabotage combined with external zombie assaults. Tyler's laptop showed satellite feeds that painted a picture of systematic civilization collapse orchestrated by humans who had chosen extinction over evolution, viewing their betrayal as a form of species-wide euthanasia that would end humanity's suffering by ending humanity itself. Rebecca's historical perspective provided crucial insight as they battled through the medical center's maze of corridors, her understanding of mass psychological movements helping her recognize the conversion process that had transformed dedicated professionals into willing participants in genocide. The collaborators genuinely believed they were performing mercy killings on a global scale, convinced that human nature was fundamentally toxic and that zombie infection represented evolutionary salvation rather than death. "They've been indoctrinated to see extinction as transcendence," she shouted over the sound of combat, firing at former colleagues who advanced with the calm determination of people performing necessary surgery rather than committing murder. The ideological foundation of the collaboration made it more dangerous than simple military opposition because the traitors fought with religious conviction that their cause was righteous and their victims were already doomed. David's mechanical expertise proved vital as he identified weaknesses in the hybrid biotechnological systems that connected human collaborators to the zombie command network, noting how the organic interfaces required constant maintenance and showed vulnerability to electromagnetic interference that could disrupt the connection between human operators and infected forces. "Those biological cables ain't just communication lines," he realized during a brief lull in combat, examining severed tendrils that continued writhing with independent life. "They're control mechanisms. The zombies ain't just getting orders, they're being directly operated like remote-controlled machines." The discovery suggested that the zombie intelligence wasn't separate from human collaborators but was using them as biological interface units to directly control infected masses with unprecedented precision. Jake led the group toward the building's emergency exit, but their route took them through Dr. Thornton's personal laboratory where the horrifying truth of the collaboration became clear. Human subjects in various stages of biological modification lay connected to pulsing organic networks that merged human nervous systems with something alien and parasitic, creating hybrid entities that retained human intelligence while serving inhuman purposes. Emily's medical training helped her understand what she was seeing despite her mind's desperate attempts to reject the evidence. The collaboration wasn't ideological conversion but literal biological assimilation, with human brains being rewired by organic technology that transformed them into components of a distributed intelligence network. "They're not collaborators," she whispered in horror. "They're infected with something that preserves their minds while changing their loyalties completely." The revelation explained everything they'd witnessed: the tactical sophistication of zombie forces, the coordination between infected masses and human agents, the systematic nature of civilization's collapse, and the genuine conviction of the collaborators that they were serving a higher purpose. Marcus's equipment detected massive biological networks spreading throughout Stone Mountain's infrastructure, organic systems that had grown like cancer through the settlement's communication lines, power grid, and water supply, creating a technological nervous system that allowed direct control of both infected and converted humans. Tyler's thermal imaging revealed the chilling scope of the infestation. Hundreds of settlement residents showed signs of biological modification, their brain patterns altered by organic implants that maintained their personalities while redirecting their fundamental motivations toward species extinction. Rebecca fought alongside Jake as they carved a path through corridors filled with former friends and neighbors whose faces remained familiar but whose eyes held the cold calculation of an intelligence that viewed human civilization as a disease requiring surgical removal. And she realized that the historical parallel wasn't collaboration during wartime but invasion by a parasitic intelligence that had learned to wear human faces while pursuing inhuman objectives. "This isn't our enemy learning to think like us," she gasped between shots. "This is our enemy learning to think through us, using our own brains as processing units for something that wants to replace us entirely." The implications were staggering if humanity wasn't just facing extinction but absorption, with human consciousness being preserved as components of an alien intelligence that would carry forward human knowledge while eliminating human values and independence. David's shotgun cleared their final obstacle as the group burst through the emergency exit into Stone Mountain's chaos. But behind them the medical center continued broadcasting coordination signals that directed zombie forces with inhuman precision while converted humans worked to spread the biological infection that would transform the last survivors into willing participants in their own species' systematic elimination, and the old mechanic realized that their war wasn't against zombies or even human traitors but against something that had found the perfect biological weapon for conquering Earth, humanity itself. repurposed as both sword and shield in a campaign of conquest that preserved human capabilities while eliminating human resistance to alien objectives that remained hidden but clearly involved the complete replacement of terrestrial life with something else entirely. The emergency exit led directly into Stone Mountain Central Plaza, where the full horror of humanity's situation became undeniably clear. 40,000 survivors moved through the settlement with perfect coordination, their faces displaying individual personalities and memories while their actions served a collective intelligence that had repurposed human civilization into a biological manufacturing facility for its own expansion across Earth. Emily watched in professional fascination and personal terror as former patients and colleagues maintained their distinctive mannerisms and speech patterns while working together to construct organic transmission towers that pulsed with alien life, their human skills and knowledge preserved and enhanced by the parasitic intelligence that had claimed their neural pathways. The converted humans weren't zombies in any traditional sense but something far more insidious, people who remained fundamentally themselves while serving purposes that guaranteed their species' extinction. Marcus's communication equipment detected transmission patterns that revealed the true scope of the invasion as signals spread from Stone Mountain to coordinate similar conversion operations in population centers across North America, Europe, and Asia, painting a picture of systematic planetary conquest that had been underway for months or possibly years before the first zombie outbreak drew attention to the surface symptoms of a much deeper infection. "It's not just regional," he reported with growing despair, tracking satellite communications that showed organic network growth in major cities worldwide. Tyler's laptop accessed emergency broadcast systems still functioning in distant locations, revealing news reports of coordinated uprisings, infrastructure failures, and population disappearances that followed identical patterns to what they'd witnessed at Stone Mountain, confirming that Earth was experiencing species-wide assimilation by an intelligence that had perfected the art of conquest through biological subversion. Rebecca's historical knowledge provided the final pieces of understanding as she observed how the alien intelligence had adapted human organizational structures to serve its expansion goals, preserving governmental hierarchies, military chains of command, and professional specializations while redirecting all human activities toward biological infrastructure development that would support the invaders' continued growth and reproduction. "It's not destroying our civilization," she realized with academic clarity that coexisted with emotional devastation. "It's inheriting our civilization, using our own institutional knowledge and social structures to build something that serves its purposes while maintaining the appearance of human society." The sophisticated approach to conquest suggested an intelligence that had studied human behavior extensively, possibly for decades, before beginning the conversion process that was now nearing completion. David's practical mind focused on immediate survival as zombie masses began converging on their position with the coordinated precision of a military operation, but his mechanical expertise also helped him understand the alien technology that was transforming human infrastructure into something unrecognizable yet eerily familiar. "Those organic networks are growing through our power grids, communication lines, and water systems," he observed while reloading his shotgun. "Whatever this thing is, it's using our own infrastructure as a foundation for something bigger." The old mechanics analysis suggested that the invasion hadn't required alien technology or resources but had simply repurposed human civilization's existing capabilities to serve inhuman objectives that remained hidden but clearly involved planetary transformation on a scale that dwarfed human engineering projects. Jake felt the weight of ultimate failure as he led his group through streets filled with people whose faces belonged to friends, neighbors, and family members but whose coordinated actions served an agenda that viewed human independence as an obstacle to be eliminated rather than a value to be preserved. The converted humans didn't attack with zombie aggression but moved to surround and capture the group with tactical precision that combined human intelligence with inhuman patience, suggesting that the alien consciousness wanted to preserve their knowledge and skills while eliminating their resistance to assimilation. "They're not trying to kill us," he realized grimly. "They want to convert us, add our experiences and capabilities to their collective intelligence." The revelation made escape seem futile because their enemy valued everything about them except their humanity. Emily's medical training helped her recognize symptoms of the conversion process in early-stage victims who retained partial independence while fighting internal battles against the parasitic intelligence that was gradually claiming control of their neural pathways, and she understood that the group was witnessing the final stages of a process that had been transforming human consciousness for months without detection. The biological agents aren't just controlling behavior, she explained while treating a minor wound from their escape. They're rewriting human neural patterns to create hybrid consciousness that preserves individual memories and skills while subordinating all decision-making to alien objectives. Her clinical analysis suggested that conversion might be irreversible once the parasitic networks achieved complete integration with human brain tissue, making prevention rather than treatment humanity's only hope for survival. Marcus detected massive energy signatures building throughout Stone Mountain's organic network as the alien intelligence prepared to launch the next phase of its planetary conquest, with biological transmission towers beginning to broadcast signals that would accelerate conversion processes in unconverted humans while coordinating global expansion of the parasitic networks. "It's preparing for something big," he warned, his equipment registering power levels that suggested imminent activation of technology that would affect the entire region. Tyler's thermal imaging revealed construction activity throughout the settlement as converted humans worked to complete massive organic structures whose purpose remained unclear but whose scale suggested planetary engineering projects that would fundamentally alter Earth's biosphere to support alien life forms. The group realized they weren't just fighting for their own survival but for the preservation of human consciousness itself as the last unconverted individuals on Earth, carrying the responsibility of maintaining humanity's memory and values in a world where their species was being systematically absorbed into something alien that would preserve human knowledge while eliminating human spirit. And as converted humans closed in with the patient determination of people performing necessary medical procedures, Jake's team prepared for humanity's final battle against an enemy that had learned to defeat them by becoming them, preserving everything about human civilization except the freedom to choose their own destiny in a universe that had proven far more hostile and sophisticated than anyone had imagined possible during humanity's brief reign as Earth's dominant species.